A Promise in the Shadows Part 2. Secrets are secret no more. The bitter chill of pre-dawn air cut through Cosner's lungs like shards of glass as he staggered under Garwood's weight. Garwood's head lolled against Cosner's shoulder, his breath shallow, his body limp except for the occasional shudder of pain. Blood from Garwood's side seeped into Cosner's jacket, sticky and warm against the night's icy grip. Each step down the deserted street was a battle against exhaustion, but Cosner pressed on. Garwood had whispered the directions through cracked lips, barely audible over the pounding in Cosner's ears. "Cut. 2 blocks over. Come up from the back. No, front door." Cosner didn't question him. He couldn't. His mind was too occupied by the weight of Garwood's broken body and the implications of what lay ahead. What kind of place had Garwood led him to? When they reached the rear walkway of the modest house, Garwood stirred just enough to rasp. Knock. 3 times. Once, then twice, but soft. "Katie's asleep." Cosner nodded, concern flickering in his eyes. Garwood, usually a fortress of resolve, seemed barely tethered to consciousness. Cosner adjusted his grip, shifting Garwood's full weight onto his shoulders, and tapped on the door as instructed. 3 times. Once, then twice. His knuckles barely made a sound, but in the quiet of the alley it felt thunderous. Locks began to click on the other side. 1, 2, 3, then more, at least 5 in total. Finally, the door swung open. Cosner froze, stunned by the woman standing before him. The woman who had appeared in the doorway was striking, her dark curls loose and framing a face that seemed to glow even in the dim light. Her amber eyes widened at the sight of Garwood, and Cosner watched as a symphony of emotions played across her face: relief, fear, determination. "Bring him in," she said sharply, stepping aside without hesitation. She moved with purpose, commanding the space as though she had been born to it. Her voice had a weight to it that left no room for argument. Cosner carried Garwood inside, surprised by how easily the woman moved to accommodate them. Cosner didn't hesitate, though her piercing gaze nearly turned his knees to jelly. He immediately noticed the odd hospital-like setup in the room. A sturdy bed sat in the corner, surrounded by medical supplies, and neatly organized shelves dominated one corner. "Lay him there," she instructed, already pulling a basin and cloth from a shelf. Cosner followed her directions, lowering Garwood onto the bed. The detective groaned as he was settled, his blood staining the pristine sheets. Cosner backed away, unsure of his role now. The woman knelt beside Garwood, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She unbuttoned his torn shirt, revealing the full extent of his injuries, bruises blossoming across his torso, gashes that bled sluggishly, the jagged piece of wood still embedded in his side. As she worked, Garwood stirred enough to grab Cosner's wrist, his grip weak but insistent. "Stay," he rasped. "You need to hear this." Cosner moved closer, unsure of what was coming but sensing its importance. "This is my wife," Garwood said, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at the woman, who didn't pause in her work. "Marie, and my daughter Catherine. She's 4. Cosner blinked, his mind racing to process the revelation. "Your wife? Your daughter?" Garwood nodded, his lips twitching in a faint, tired smile. "This house. It's my real life. The apartment, the rest of it, it's all a cover." Cosner stared, trying to process the revelation. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why all the secrecy?" Garwood coughed, the effort racking his battered frame. Marie shot Cosner a sharp glance, but Garwood held up a hand to stop her. Cosner shook his head in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Garwood's gaze softened, and he exhaled slowly, the effort clearly taxing. "Because someday, someone would come for me. The monsters in this city, they'd try to take me down. I couldn't let them find Marie, or Katie." His voice cracked, raw with emotion. "It was the only way to keep them safe." Cosner felt a pang of hurt, but couldn't deny his admiration. The sheer effort it must have taken to live such a lie, it was staggering. The weight of Garwood's words settled on Cosner like a lead blanket. The secrecy, the isolation, It all made sense now, and yet he couldn't help but feel a pang of betrayal. "Why now?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Why bring me here when you're in more danger than ever?" Garwood closed his eyes briefly, his expression pained. "Because if I didn't make it out of that B basement, someone had to know, someone I trust." For the next hour, Cosner stood back, his admiration growing as Marie worked. Her hands were steady, her movements efficient as she cared for Garwood. She cleaned his wounds, stitched his cuts, and bandaged his bruises with a precision that spoke of experience. "Bandages," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Top shelf, and the alcohol." Marie's demeanor hardly changed. She was calm but commanding, her tone leaving no room for doubt or delay. Cosner scrambled to comply, fetching supplies and watching as she transformed Garwood from a bloodied wreck into something resembling the man Cosner knew. The change was remarkable. At one point, Cosner couldn't hold back his curiosity. "Are you a nurse? How are you so good at this?" he asked hesitantly. Marie paused, her eyes locking onto his with a burning intensity. "Do you think this is the first time this city has tried to kill him?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. Cosner swallowed hard. "I guess not." Her gaze softened as she returned to her work. "I've been putting him back together for years. It's what I do." When she finished, she sat beside Garwood, spooning broth into his mouth. Cosner lingered nearby, still unsure of his place but unable to leave. Marie's calm facade cracked only once when she turned to Cosner. "Tell me," she demanded, her tone unyielding. "Who did this to him?" Cosner stammered. I don't know the full story. We were ambushed. It was Carlucci's men, but..." Marie's gaze bore into him, and he felt the urge to shrink back. Cosner hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Carlucci's men," he admitted finally. "I don't know all the details." Her amber eyes continued to burn into him, but before she could press further, Garwood raised a hand to touch her wrist. The silent exchange between them was so intimate that Cosner felt like an intruder. Marie's features softened instantly, her focus shifting back to her husband. She resumed her work, her movements gentler now. By dawn, Garwood was coherent enough to give orders. "Cosner," he rasped, his voice stronger now. "You need to report this to the department. Tell them about Manny. He didn't have anyone else. I'll see he gets a proper burial." Cosner nodded. "Tell them I'm injured, staying with friends. I'll be in tomorrow to give my statement." "What about Olivia?" Cosner asked cautiously. Garwood's jaw tightened. "Check on her, and her parents. I wasn't able to." His voice trailed off, the weight of unfinished business clear. Cosner nodded again, determination hardening in his chest. "I'll take care of it." Garwood's bruised face twisted into a faint smile. "And Cosner, come back tomorrow night. We're not done yet." The morning sun painted the streets in muted gold as Cosner made his way to the Parkhurst residence. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Garwood's secret life, Marie's strength, the danger looming over them all. Now, in his own bed, Garwood stirred in the faint light that filtered through the curtains. Marie softly ran a cool cloth over his fevered brow. His battered body ached, but the warmth of her touch and the faint smell of herbs and broth brought him a sliver of peace. Marie's strength had steadied him in the darkest of times, but even she couldn't keep the wolves at bay forever. As Garwood's mind sharpened, his thoughts returned to Cosner. He hoped the rookie had managed to stay composed while under the department's scrutiny. Cosner was sharp, dependable, and loyal, but even the sharpest steel bent under enough pressure. Marie sat beside him, her amber eyes fixed on his face. "I'll handle it," she said softly, her voice firm. "Whatever's coming for us, Bo, we'll face it together." Garwood reached for her hand, the calluses on his fingers brushing against her smooth skin. "They'll come, Marie. They always do." Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Then let them. They don't know who they're up against." But across the city, the scene that greeted him at the Parkhurst home would haunt Cosner forever. Blood, broken glass, a door swinging ajar, and silence. The monsters of Kansas City had struck again.